Okay guys, today I want to talk mainly about this camera here and this electronic filter wheel because we have a monochrome camera paired with a filter wheel so we can take color images from a monochrome sensor. But I also want to point your attention that this, including the camera and the filter wheel and the filters within, but everything here, with the exception of the telescope itself, and the mount that it's riding on, everything is from the brand Touptek. So we have a guide scope here, a focal length of 200 millimeters, aperture of 45 millimeters, with a nice little Crayford focuser that works really well, together with a Touptek guide camera that has the IMX662 monochrome sensor within. Then, as I was mentioning, we have a filter wheel here, which is the AFW-M, so automated filter wheel medium size by Touptek that can accommodate 7 filters of 36 millimeters unmounted or 1.25 inch mounted. And the filters within, we have LRGB, so luminance, red, green, and blue filters, so we can take broadband images and have them basically colored together with the monochrome sensor that I have in this camera. But also we have Touptek, Sulfur 2, H-alpha, and Oxygen 3 filters. And those are narrowband filters which are great for capturing emission nebulae or planetary nebulae from very light polluted cities like here in Tokyo, Japan, so one of the most light polluted cities on the planet. And what's very special with those SHO filters, Sulfur 2, H-alpha, and Oxygen 3, is that those band passes are 3.5 nanometer for H-alpha, which is really narrow, and 4 nanometers for Sulfur 2 and Oxygen 3, which is still quite narrow. And we have it paired with the Touptek ATR 585 monochrome camera. So it comes, as its name would imply, with the 585 sensor, or the IMX 585 sensor, which, if you know me, I'm a big fan of. It is currently my favorite sensor on the market. It's a small sensor, but it comes with tiny pixels, 2.9 microns. You can get great pixel scales, great details on your targets. And it has great sensitivity in the red spectrum, in particular in Sulfur 2 and H-alpha, which is great for narrowband. It also has great sensitivity in the rest of the spectrum. But astrophotography cameras tend to struggle a little bit in terms of sensitivity or quantum efficiency in the red side of the spectrum, and the 585 sensor does not. And we'll look at the detailed specs of this camera later on. And what is very special as well with this camera compared to another monochrome camera on the market with the same sensor from QHY, like the QHY Minicam 8, which I've already featured on this channel. I'll put the link up above and down in the description to that review. But the Touptek cameras has better drivers and better firmware in general, in my opinion, simply because there is something called low conversion gain and high conversion gains in those camera and camera sensors. And in a lot of cameras from ZW, from QHY, the switch happens like kind of independent of the user's will. There's like a specific gain at which it automatically switches between low conversion gain to high conversion gain. And for instance, on the color version of this sensor for the ZW camera, so the ASI 585 MC Pro, that switch, in my opinion, happens where the gain is a bit too high already. Touptek gives us the control. We have a switch where we can choose between low conversion gain and high conversion gain and pair it with whatever gain we want. And that is a big plus in my opinion. Also, this camera comes with an integrated dew heater, which the other brands for this size of sensor typically don't have. And it has a 2-stage cooler that advertises it can cool to 45 degrees Celsius below ambient. So if the outside temperature is 30 degrees Celsius, you can expect to cool the sensor all the way to minus 15 degrees Celsius at best. I'll come back to that in a moment, by the way. And on this setup, I'm still not finished because on the other side, you cannot see it, but I'll show you on the video, there is an electronic focuser by Touptek. It is the Touptek AAF for automated astrophotography focuser. I don't remember what the second A stands for, but it's there and it works great. And we have all of this controlled by Touptek's answer to the ZW ASI Air. And that is the Touptek Astro Station, which can control with a very intuitive smartphone app. I've been using it a lot. It works great. I mean, it's still beta. There's some issues, and I'll do a separate video on that. But the Touptek Astro Station, they've actually changed the name, I think, to Stella Vida. I'm not super enthusiastic about that name, but it's up to them. It's their prerogative. But it can control all of this equipment, but it doesn't limit itself to Touptek equipment like the ZW-ASI Air does with like cameras and rotators and focusers and filter wheels. This can control ZW cameras, ZW filter wheels, other brands' filter wheels and cameras. It does not force the end user to stay locked in the Touptek ecosystem. And so this whole equipment here, the old Touptek system that I have here, the old Touptek rig, in my opinion, is a game changer for the hobby because it provides real competition to ZW, a maker that does everything basically that ZW does, except for now, a mount. And also telescopes, because ZW has their own line of telescopes that are rebranded Ascar telescopes. But anyway, let's go to the main focus of the video, which is going to be this filter wheel and the ATR 585 monochrome camera. And this is how it looks like. So we have the camera actually connected to the filter wheel via actual screws in there. So there's no way to rotate it. But of course, the threads are available as well. So you can screw in a ZW camera as is if you want, or other brand cameras as well. And the filter wheel itself comes with various accessories in the box, like this kind of adapter, so you can have the right back focus distance. You also have like the conversion rings for something like M48. Dust cap for the filter wheel as well. So it's very similar in spirit to what ZW offers in terms of you'll be able to achieve your back focus, and you have all of the accessories that you need to connect your filter wheel not only to your camera at the back, but also to the telescope. And I also want to mention that the way that you can mount unmounted filters is actually pretty smart. You have like this kind of mask around the filter that is held on by 3 screws that you just need to put on after slotting in the filter, and it holds everything in place very, very well. It's impossible to over tighten it. It's just well done overall. The only drawback, which is the same with ZW filter wheels these days, is that you do have screw holes here, which are useful if you want to attach an off-axis guider on the other side of the filter wheel. But otherwise, it's better to have some electrician's tape to cover them like that and avoid any light leaks. And then at the very back, of course, you can see the nice little tiny cute sensor of the 585 monochrome camera from Touptek. And by the way, on the back of the camera itself, we have the usual stuff. We have a power input for DC 12 volts, and we have LEDs that are there, together with our USB input, which is USB-B, USB 3 type of input. The cable is provided with the camera. And you also have a USB 2 hub, so you can connect the filter wheel directly via the camera and something like an automated astrophotography focuser, the AEF by Touptek, or the EAF, or anything else that you want to use for a focuser, for instance. So one cable to the filter wheel, one cable to the focuser, and then one cable to the main camera from the computer, or in my case, from the Touptek Astro Station. One thing as well to note is that the LEDs here at the bottom, you can choose them to have them off. It's an option in the drivers, or in Nina, if you connect to the camera using the native drivers, you'll be able to just select LEDs on or off. And on, it's great if you think you have a problem with the camera to make sure that it is doing something, right, and getting power and connected, etc. And just set it off for during the night so you don't get any light pollution from those LEDs. That said, even when they're on, they're red, and they're not as bright as I recall the very first runs of Touptek cameras to be. So I think Touptek has really learned a lot of lessons in their astrophotography journey, and they're definitely listening to feedback, which is a good thing. And talking about that as well, so I already mentioned the name of the camera is the ATR 585M, and this is also a good thing because if you remember, Touptek used to have pretty difficult names for their cameras, and they've again listened to feedback from people like me, and they've simplified their naming scheme, which is very much welcome. Now, before we go and look at the specifications of the camera, first, disclaimers. All of this Touptek equipment, as far as I understand, was sent to me for free by Touptek, so I get to keep it, which is quite a big deal. Also, I have to declare it on my taxes. It's always a lot of fun. But anyway, all of that Touptek equipment that I have on there is something that I can keep. So please keep that in mind, as it could influence my review, even though I try to stay as objective as possible. Also, I have measured with my spectrophotometer the filters within the filter wheel. So those 36mm diameter unmounted filters, LRGB, nothing wrong to signal. They're all high transmission. They work well. There's no issues that I can see with my spectrophotometer. And in terms of the sulfur 2 and oxygen 3 filters that I got as well, I can confirm that those filters have a full width half max of 4 nanometers perfectly on the spectrophotometer, and they're also well centered on their respective band passes of 500.7 nanometers for oxygen 3 and around 672 from memory for sulfur 2. So that's great. H-alpha was a proper full width half max of 3.5 nanometer roughly, so exactly as expected, but it is slightly off-center. But it is off-center in the right direction, in that if you were to use this H-alpha filter, at least the sample that I got, with a slow telescope, something like a Schmidt-Cassegrain at f10 or f7, for instance, you'd probably have around 80-85% transmission, which is okay without being great. But the bandpass itself is actually slightly shifted to the right, so towards the red, which is great because with faster telescopes, that actually makes it a bit usable. So this telescope here is f4.8, and that will actually shift the bandpass a bit towards the left, so actually get better transmission than otherwise. But still, that means that there could be a little bit of lottery between those filters because the H-alpha filter was not quite centered. It was centered maybe 0.5 nanometer, between 0.5 and 1 nanometer. The bandpass was shifted to the right. Not a big deal, but something I thought I would mention. And now, talking a little bit about the camera itself, I already mentioned like the cooling potential of the camera, which advertises up to 45 degrees Celsius below ambient. When I tested it in a temperature-controlled room, I was not quite able to get 45 degrees below ambient, but I managed to get roughly 42 to 43 degrees below ambient, which is perfectly adequate in my opinion. Anyway, with cooled cameras and modern sensors like the IMX585, it doesn't make much sense to cool below an absolute temperature of -5 or -10 degrees Celsius. So I think it's very good for all kinds of weather. Of course, I've also taken this camera, I've run it through some tests in SharpCap with the sensor analysis. I'll be able to show you that. I also want to show you the specs, and I've already taken some images with this camera and those filters, specifically the sulfur 2, H-alpha and oxygen 3 filters on the Rosette Nebula, but also on the Horsehead Nebula, so we can see if we have any halos with those filters on the very bright star Alnitak. Oh, and by the way, the camera came with all of the adapters that you need also for the perfect back focus. You have the 25mm adapter, you have the 16.5mm adapter, you have also some adapters if you want to slot them into a 1.25-inch or 2-inch barrel to be used as an eyepiece, for instance. So you have everything you need to use the camera with the proper back focus, just like you would with ZW cameras. Before we go into the specs, I want to mention a bit the price of the filter wheel, the filters, and the camera. Because if you remember from my review of the QHY Minicam 8, we had an exceptional price of, I think, $800 for the monochrome camera with the cooling, together with all of the LRGB SHO filters, with the drawback compared to this, that those filters are non-standard, so it's you're kind of dependent on QHY if you have any issues with the filter or you want to buy new ones. And also the narrowband filters have full width half max of 7 nanometers, which is basically twice as wide as the filters in this filter wheel from Touptek. So it's pretty good, but it's not as good, especially from light polluted cities like here in Tokyo. So the camera itself is $599, so $600 for the camera with the cooling, with the adapters I showed for the perfect back focus. The filter wheel is $240. Then you add the LRGB filters, and that's $179. And then finally, the SHO narrowband 3.5 to 4 nanometer full width half max band passes, and those are for the full set $499, which sounds like a lot, but if you know enough about filters and about how expensive those with very tight bandpasses are, it's actually a really good deal. But that means that the whole system, filter wheel, filters, and camera, so all of those elements here taken together, costs around $1,517, which is almost twice the price as the QHY Minicam 8. But with that, you get filters that are standard, so you can change them. You get much tighter band passes. You get better software control of your camera with the low conversion gain, high conversion gain. You also have direct control of the fan. The cooler doesn't go full power upon connection, unlike the QHY camera. And also you have a dew heater. So you have various advantages, but you're paying twice the price. So something to keep in mind. So with that, let's go and have a look at all of those specifications and the results of my imaging and my sensor analysis with this filter wheel, filters, and camera. And before we do that, don't forget to quickly like the video. It really helps the channel out. And let me know how well you think this will do with this 585 sensor down in the comments. And if you want to support me even more at no cost to you and you're planning on buying anything from Touptek, High Point Scientific, Agena, etc., and you do so after clicking one of the links that I have down in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. And of course, I'll have the links to all of the equipment that I have there in the description if you're interested. Everything here is pretty exceptional, really good equipment overall. Oh, and I will not have the link to the stuff that hasn't been released yet. But yeah, check the links in the description, and if you use them, it will help me out at no cost to you. And of course, if you want to sponsor the channel directly to make those videos possible directly, you can join my channel as a member. It is the join button next to the subscribe button, or you can join my Patreon, and the link is down in the description. Some ranks of my Patreon have access to my videos early and without ads. And you guys, you know it, you make this channel possible. Thank you so much for your support. Anyway, let's go inside and look a bit deeper into the specs and the results that we can get with this camera, filter wheel, and filters. Okay, now we can look at the detailed specs of that camera as well as imaging results that I got with it. So first things first, let's look a bit at the field of view. I already did that with the QHY Minicam 8. It's the same sensor, so you'll have the same type of stuff. It's a small sensor, but can still frame targets fairly decently if you have a small refractor, and you can go really deep if you have a larger Newtonian or even a Schmidt-Cassegrain. So this is an example on the Pleiades, where we have like the red image is this sensor on the Pleiades with the SQA 55, so very small refractor. In blue, we have with the SQA 85, which is what I was using for this particular test. And then in yellow, you would have with a typical 6-inch imaging Newtonian, and then in green you have like with a Schmidt-Cassegrain 8-inch Edge HD telescope without any reducers. So obviously the field of view becomes really tiny in that case, which is not great for things like nebulae. But if you start looking at very small objects like M104, the Sombrero Galaxy, as an example, then the reverse is true, right? We get the C8 Edge HD, which is perfect for this camera, and then the others are less good. Let's say I would say the SQA 85 would actually work pretty well still, and it would still have like 1.5 arc seconds per pixels at that level of focal length for 408 millimeters for the SQA 85, but then it starts to be a bit not as good for the SQA 55. It's too wide for such a galaxy, but that's more the problem of the refractor than it is the problem of the camera. I really like this sensor. And if we look at the actual website and the specifications of the sensor itself, it's the usual stuff. It's a monochrome 585 sensor. We have our DDR3 buffer, USB 3.0, the tech all the way down to 45 degrees below ambient temperature, although as I've mentioned, I've only managed 42 to 43 degrees below ambient. Okay, I'll give that a pass. And we have the usual stuff. What's important also is quantum efficiency of over 91%. Looking down in the specs, we don't have any amp glow, which is something I have verified again and again and again with this sensor, so that's good. We also have an anti-dew system within the camera, which I think for this small sensor is kind of unique to Touptek. And here we have the good old graphs of read noise, etc., etc. So those are, I mean, if you don't know what those are, I really highly recommend you watch my videos about those. I'll put the link up above and down in the description. But basically, you can see that we have the camera when it is used in low conversion gain mode, in high conversion gain mode, and in HDR mode, which I haven't yet tested. I know that for a while there were issues with this HDR mode on the color version of that camera until a firmware update, but I haven't really tested. For me, I'm always using this camera in high conversion gain because I don't really need that much of the dynamic range, and I don't really need the really, really small read noise. I'm always at like gain 100, which is the leftmost gain on this chart. So that means I have 1 electron of read noise. If you don't like that, it might make sense on the high conversion gain to go all the way to this one, although you would be sacrificing roughly 1 stop of dynamic range. So you could go to gain like 316, sacrifice 1 stop of dynamic range, and get much better read noise at the same time, which could be useful for things like lucky deep space imaging, which is a thing. But for me, I'm always using it high conversion gain, gain 100, and offset I used 500, just FYI. So those are all of the curves, and then we have the relative response. So this is, you need, if you want the absolute response of the sensor to different wavelengths, you need to multiply this graph by 0.91 effectively. But you can see that that gives us, for the frequencies that we're interested, we are always at the lowest between something like 60% and at the highest in H alpha and in sulfur 2, we're at roughly 90%. So it's a really good quantum efficiency there. And by the way, I also ran the SharpCap sensor analysis on the camera. These are the results, but this actually is a limitation in SharpCap. Doesn't really allow camera maker in their drivers to have this separate high conversion gain, low conversion gain thing. So Touptek has a custom driver just for SharpCap where there is a switch from low conversion gain to high conversion gain. So unfortunately, that's only what I can show you. So you have, and so unfortunately, we cannot really equivocate to the actual specs of the sensor, which is a bit of a bummer. But we do see that when you get to the high conversion gain, which is in SharpCap, only in SharpCap at gain like 13,065 roughly, then your read noise goes to roughly 1. And it actually looks to me that this area here, this gain 1365, is actually equivalent to gain 100 with the switch high conversion gain set to on. So it's a bit confusing when you look at SharpCap. And the reason I say that is that we get those almost 12 stops of dynamic range together with the read noise of roughly 1 electron, which matches with the curves that we saw earlier when using high conversion gain. So unfortunately, SharpCap cannot tell us that much about the camera, except that it seems to be working. Okay, now let's have a look at the results on the Horsehead Nebula. This is H alpha, and that was 32 5-minute exposures on the Horsehead Nebula. No issues to signal. Then we have Oxygen 3 here, and we had 48 exposures of 5 minutes each on that one. Now, it also should be noted that I made a mistake during the capture. So actually, if you looked at the auto crop of those images, you'd get only this area of the frame at the very center because I misframed the target during one of the nights. But it is what it is. And on Oxygen 3, around Alnitak, we can see indeed that there is a halo. It's not that strong, but it is there. So something to keep in mind here, little halo here on Alnitak, which is basically the worst case scenario that you can have. Again, this is 48 frames of 5 minutes each. And then we have Sulfur 2, and this one has 35 frames of 5 minutes each. And there's this weird like banding artifact next to Alnitak that I tried to reproduce later, and I never managed to reproduce it. So my assumption is that it has maybe something to do with the system that I used to captured those images, which was the Touptek Astro Station, which is still a beta version. So I'm not too worried about this thing here. And just to give you an idea of the process, as usual, I would do like, my rotations, blur exterminator, noise exterminator, resampling, all this kind of good stuff before stretching all of the images. And after that, I could combine the images and play with the colors, remove green in there, have a lot of fun again, still with the colors. I like that result again. I love this nebula. And then once I'm more or less done, I could just place the stars back, and this is what we obtained with the stars placed back on the Horsehead Nebula with my SQA85 telescope, not mine, it's on loan, but whatever. The SQA85 telescope, those filters from Touptek, the filter wheel from Touptek, and the camera from Touptek, and everything else from Touptek. It's kind of funny. We do see a remnant, indeed, of the halo around Alnitak. You know me, I don't really mind halos, but if you mind halos a lot, then maybe the Oxygen 3 filter is not for you. It's completely up to you. Let's have a quick look at another image I took, which is on, I believe, the Rosette Nebula. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so for the Rosette Nebula, I captured 36 frames of 5 minutes each for hydrogen alpha. I captured 75 frames of 5 minutes each for oxygen 3, and I captured 44 frames of 5 minutes each for sulfur 2. So we have a lot of exposure time. And these are the results. Here we have sulfur 2. So no issue whatsoever with this stack. It's beautiful. I don't have the artifact that I had seen on the Horsehead that I've never been able to reproduce since. This is H alpha. And this is oxygen 3. And you know what? I love sulfur 2 on this image. Sulfur 2 is so haunting. It's rare that sulfur 2 seems to be so much more fun to look at than hydrogen alpha, which is a bit boring compared to sulfur 2. But that's just my opinion. Usual stuff, play with the images, remove background, do some noise reduction. So this is the example on sulfur 2. And we obtain this once the image is stretched. And I've done the same for all of the other images. And then once combined, this is what we got on the Rosette. Remove the stars, do some colors, adjustment, saturation, etc. before placing back the stars. And this is what I obtained with my particular processing, which I think is it's a pretty cool result. I'm also very happy with that. So it's one of the reasons I love the 585 sensor, and I'm so happy to see monochrome cameras with that sensor. We have the QHY Minicam 8, the ATR 585M, or if you're in the UK, for instance, the Altair 585, or whatever the name is basically a rebranded Touptek. So it should work very well as well. And this is the kind of results that we get. So should you buy the Touptek ATR 585M? I cannot make the decision for you. Should you buy a monochrome camera with a filter wheel and with filters? And should that camera be based on the 585 sensor? I tend to say yes to that. If you are okay with something like the QHY Minicam 8, with the limitation that you're kind of stuck with the filters that it provides, you cannot change them for better filters down the line, then the QHY Minicam 8 is still like the budget king of monochrome imaging right now. There's no better alternative. But if you don't like the drawbacks of the Minicam 8, you cannot buy third-party filters, at least not for now. You have the weird, like the moment you plug it in, like the fan and the cooling go full blast, and that's a bit annoying. And that kind of stuff, you're looking for something better and more flexible, and that potentially can work better for the long term, then you might go towards something like the Touptek ATR 585M, which has excellent cooling. It has the dew heater. It has the USB hub at the back, and that I cannot stress enough how much of a difference that makes. I love having this USB hub at the back. It really makes everything much easier, at least for me. And then, of course, when you pair it to the filter wheel, you have the ability to put whatever filters you want in there, and Touptek does offer some pretty good filters, including those sulfur 2, H alpha, and oxygen 3 filters that are very tight band passes that seem to be mostly up to specs, and so that can provide great results in light polluted cities like I just showed you. It's twice the price overall to have this whole system compared to something simpler like the Minicam 8. So it's all about everything integrated and cheap. Or do you want something more flexible that could work potentially better for the long term, where you have more features? Completely up to you. You will get excellent results with both cameras. If you're like me in a very light polluted city, I would personally orient you more towards the Touptek camera so you can have tighter bandpasses for your narrowband imaging. But again, it really depends on your style of imaging and what you like to image. So let me know down in the comments what choice you would make. Would you go for the less flexible, cheaper stuff, or the more expensive, more capable to some extent stuff like Touptek? Let us know down in the comments. I'll be really interested to hear your thoughts. Let me also know what I should review next. Should I do a review of the Touptek Astro Station, now named Stella Vita? Let me know down as well. And while you're going there, please like the video. You can also consider subscribing to the channel. And if you want to support the channel even more and you're planning on buying anything from Agena, Touptek, High Point Scientific, etc., if you do so after clicking the links that I have down in the description, it helps me out at no cost to you. And if you want to completely sponsor the channel directly, you can join my channel as a member. It's the join button next to the subscribe button, or join my Patreon as a Patreon supporter. The link is down in the description. You guys, as always, thank you so much for your help. But to everyone, thank you so much for watching. I hope it was interesting. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.